Hi, my name is Neil Kelleher. In this video, I'd like to focus on butt or glute activation, not just the Gluteus Maximus, but also tensor fasciae latae and basically tensor fasciae latae, which attaches to the IT band, but also the fibers of the glute maximus that attach to the IT band. Possibly those, and possibly glute minor, glute minimus, and medius, but basically ass muscle activation. And this came about when I started lifting weights, so again over the last year, and doing weighted squats. What I found is that my hips feel a little bit empty. I've worked on different muscle activations. I found calf activation was very helpful for my hips. And in particular because I've been working with knee and hip issues, so I found calf activations was the best general fix, sort of like the most important fix for making my hips, particularly my hip, feel not painful. And you could think of that as like I did all sorts of other hip activations. Nothing seemed to work consistently until I started activating my calves in such a way that I was squeezing or making the tendons at the back of the knees feel engaged. And once I did that, then it was easier to make other adjustments directly to the hips in such a way that the hips felt good. And more late, still had some problems with the knee, and this might possibly be a fix for the knee. I've had, sometimes I get pain in the outside of the knee, and this is a possible fix for that sort of pain, which I would associate with the IT band. But in addition to that, working with knee and hip problems, there's a sensation I get when I'm doing squats with weight in particular, where my hips don't feel, almost feels like they're empty. There's not enough muscle activation, and the squats themselves feel fine, but I was interested, it's like, what is that missing? And I was doing bench press and resting in between bench press, and I just started doing a particular exercise where I was activating my big butt muscle, my glute, and I was like, well, so that's it, I'm not activating my glute enough. So for this exercise, this is actually an exercise you could do while sitting at your desk. You need a chair, or I suggest using a chair. So you could sit at the edge of the chair, and one basic idea that I use when deliberately trying to activate muscles is the muscle overstretched? Not stretched, is the distance over which the muscle crosses too long for the muscle to actively activate? And you could say there's a range, so say if this is maximum length and this is shortest length. If the distance a muscle crosses is maximally long, then it's difficult for the muscle to contract effectively. It's stretched too far unless you do training to train that end range of motion. Then likewise, if the distance a muscle crosses is too short, it's also difficult to activate. It can't squeeze enough. Right in the middle, there's an optimum range where a muscle can work effectively. And I'd suggest, and I guess the rationale behind this was that there's a range of effective movement for the glute maximus. And I'd add on here that part of training the body could be, first of all, to find the effective range within which a muscle can activate. Then part of training could be to extend, so flexibility training could be extending the effective range of muscle. Strength, and that would count as strength training as well, but then strength training could be learning to increase the effective range of muscle in the shortened position. They're both really strength training. You could overall call that getting better control of your body. But anyway, for the glutes, if I tilt my pelvis forward relative to my thighs in this position, the distance that the fibers of the gluteus maximus passes over is basically stretching the ass, stretching the glute maximus. So this position is actually difficult because the pelvis is tilted forward relative to the thighs. It's difficult to activate the glutes effectively. So how do you then activate it effectively? Tilt the pelvis back relative to the thighs, then it's easier to activate the butt muscle. At least that's the theory. But anyway, a first step for this exercise would be to, and you don't have to use a chair, this is just how I started it, is you could lean forward and just lift your butt off of the chair. And that's the exercise to begin with. And this is just to get used to the movement. First, leaning forward, shifting your weight forward, maybe moving your feet back so you can lift your butt off of the chair and stay here for a few breaths. So that's the basic exercise. If that causes knee pain, then you probably have to leave it out and start from a standing position. But from here, once you can get your butt comfortably off the chair, notice my pelvis is tilted forward relative to my thighs. I've closed the front of my hip joint. So in order to make it easier to activate my butt, I'm going to tilt my pelvis backwards. There, I'm going to try and squeeze my butt and I can feel it. It feels strong. And then go back down. So that's basically the exercise. This is butt activation for office workers. If you like, you could reach your hands forward to make it easier to lift your butt off of the chair. So lean forward, stand up. So here my weight's on my heels. You can see my fronts of my feet are lifted. I'll tilt my pelvis back, try and squeeze the back of the butt. And notice as I do that, I'm not turning my feet out. I'm just keeping my feet, keeping my legs parallel. So if you have difficulty in, say, a pose like bridge or wheel posing, keeping your legs parallel, this could be a way of practicing butt activation while keeping your legs parallel, even though you're tilted more forward than backwards. If you can feel your feet, your thighs parallel in this pose, it might be easier to take that same awareness into a pose like bridge or wheel where you can't actually see your feet. But anyway, going forward, tilt your pelvis back, squeeze your butt, and you can vary the amount of tilt. So, and actually what's happening now is, once I get my butt activated, I can activate it further to increase the back tilt of my pelvis. Now, one of the reasons I think that is suggested for tilting your pelvis forward in a weighted squat is to help protect the lower back. I would suggest, take this with a grain of salt, I would suggest actually tilting your pelvis back. You're giving room possibly for the psoas to effectively contract and create a forward. They call it a shearing force on the lumbar spine. I'd suggest it's actually a supporting force to help keep the lumbar spine stable. So you've got forces from the front, you've got muscles from the front, you've got muscles on the back. Both of those together help to keep your lumbar spine safe. The biggest, and that would be my argument for learning to feel your spine in different actions. Does it feel safe? Does it feel comfortable? Does it feel strong? If not, then maybe what you're doing isn't the best thing for your spine or for your hips. So getting rid of the chair, you could do something similar from a standing position, actually reaching your hips back and then say tucking under the pelvis slightly. And one of the things I should point out, when I was first doing chair pose, or when I was teaching chair pose, one of my focuses was the lower back. So holding chair pose, this is chair pose without the chair, my instruction back then, and I don't teach chair pose that often these days, but my instruction back then was to tilt the pelvis back or forward until the lumbar spine felt comfortable. Basically the best way I describe it. It just feels like the lumbar spine, like there's no, it feels, the back of the spine feels open, feels, you might say, basically the best way to do it is to experience it. It's, and this is a general mindset I use in all my exercises, particularly when working with beginners, or teaching an exercise for the first time. It's like, you could hold a pose for 5 or 10 breaths and then repeat that, over the course of 10 or 20 practices, you get 20 experiences of holding that pose. Or at the very beginning, move your body within the pose so that you can feel what's happening and get a better experience of your body in a shorter period of time. So to get the feeling for your lower back, what you could do is hold chair pose, tilt your pelvis forward, notice how your lower back feels. Tilt your pelvis back, notice how it feels. So I'd say this is a bit too much. But if you've never experienced your lower back, then you get to feel it. You notice a feeling here, notice a feeling here, notice a feeling here. Okay, now if I venture, this actually feels more comfortable. So one idea here is when I say the words tuck the pelvis under, is not a word that I will use all the time. It's not a basic alignment point. So every time I teach chair pose, I won't say, okay, tuck your tailbone under or tuck your pelvis under. I try to stay away from any cue that I use consistently, unless it's cues that I do use consistently. Move slowly, move smoothly. Focus on feeling your body, or focus on feeling a particular part of your body. But in terms of doing a certain action, I tend to stay away from any particular cues, or unless I'm teaching, say, butt activation, I'll be focusing on butt activation for a particular class. Okay, squeeze your butt, relax it. But I would only use that cue over the course of a week or two to get people used to being able to activate and relax, say their buttock at will, and then we move on to another part. So I'm not always consistently saying engage mula bandha, if that has any meaning to you. I'm always trying to change the cues that I use. I'm always trying to change the focus, and sometimes I don't say anything at all. It's just, okay, do this, you focus on feeling your own body. But going back to chair pose again, so if you're higher up, that's fine. You can do the same thing as we did while on the chair. Tilt the pelvis back until you can effectively squeeze your glute maximus, and then relax. Tilt your pelvis back, squeeze your glute maximus, relax. And if you need to rest, then stand up. Reach your hips back, bend the knees, reach your arms forward, tilt your pelvis back until you can actively squeeze your glute maximus. And then you can, while keeping your glutes engaged, you can change the amount of tilt, explore it, and then relax. Stand up, reach your hips back, squeeze, and then relax. Could do a similar thing at the bottom. Now in squatting circles with weight, there's a lot of people tend to criticize whenever they see a squatter tucking their pelvis under, and I would suggest here the best thing is to focus on awareness. So if you are doing it with weight, do be careful. Take anything anyone says, well, take what I'm saying with a pinch of salt. Find it for yourself, feel it for yourself, see what works for you. But in this position, you could do the same thing. I find it more, my hips feel stronger if I do a slight backward tilt of the pelvis. So basically it's easier to activate my ass so that I can come out. So one thing that you could do is, if you're comfortable going all the way down, and this is without weight, is activate your glutes here. As you go all the way down, make any adjustments to your pelvis so that you can keep your glutes squeezed and then come back up, or go all the way up. And I should point out, you might need to change your foot position. Do vary your foot position. That's a point actually. I was doing wide leg squats. We were trying to hold wide leg squat for 5 minutes, me and a friend, and doing this over a course of days, over a course of a few days. And I found one particular foot position basically effed up my hips. It didn't make my hips feel good. So it's like, okay, that position doesn't work for me. I'm not going to show you what position it was for me, because for you it's probably going to be different. So be aware of foot position, knee position, in this case, pelvic position, pelvic tilt relative to your hips when you're doing any sort of possibly extreme exercise, so that if you notice in the course of repeating a particular exercise, if you notice that your hips or your knees or your feet start to feel fucked up, change what you're doing. Vary your foot position so that they don't feel that way. So anyway, going back to, so one other thing with this. So that was mainly focused on glute maximus. So that's 2 basic exercises you can do. So even sitting at a chair, you can if you're taking a quick break, if you need to take a break from what you're doing, so working on the computer, you can lean forward, try and lift your butt, try and tilt it back, see if you can squeeze your glutes. Now another important idea, and this is because I've been dealing with sharp knee pain in certain positions. I find it actually when I'm getting up, say from a tabletop, my hands are behind me, and if I'm getting up, leaning forward to get up, get a sharp pain right around here. And what I think that is something to do with IT band, iliotibial tract, which is band of connective tissue. So this is the head of the fibula right here, just in front of it. So that's where the biceps femoris attaches to, the short head and then the long head. Now just in front, so this is the tibia, the bigger bone of the shin. So just in front of that, that's where the IT band attaches to. And there may be other attachments as well, but that's the main attachment. That's where I'm getting my sharp knee pain. So that runs, the IT band runs up the side of the thigh. It attaches to the crest of the pelvis, but it also has muscular connections. The tensor fasciae latae connects to it from the front of the hip crest, so down to about there. So if that's my greater trochanter, somewhere around here it connects to the IT band. Then there's fibers from the Gluteus Maximus attached approximately at psoas, the posterior superior iliac spine or crest, and that too attaches to the IT band at or around the point where you can feel the bone of your thigh. So those muscles I'm starting to feel are quite important in hip stability. One way that you can think of those muscles activating is, in order to give your IT band a stable foundation, in order to give those two muscles a stable foundation from which to help control the pelvis, make sure your shins are stable. So maybe rotationally stable, feet active. If your shin bones are stable, that gives the IT band a firm, solid foundation from which to work on controlling the pelvis. Going back to the very first point where it was tilting the pelvis back to give the glute maximus a room to move. Same could apply for both these two sets of muscles. So in a deep squat with my pelvis tilted all the way forward, I would suggest here it's a bit harder. I think it's harder than for the fibers of glute maximus to activate effectively. So where is that? So right about here. It's harder for that to act effectively here, and it's harder for here. Like in this position, both sets of muscles can pull evenly on the IT band. If my pelvis is tilted forward, then the work these two muscles do is uneven. So one may be able to activate, but the other can't. And so one idea in controlling the tilted pelvis, and you don't have to keep it at 90 degrees, but one idea in tilting the pelvis forward or back is to make it easier for both sets of muscles that attach to the IT band to effectively contract and help control the IT band. And it might be that in certain positions one muscle is more dominant, and in other positions, say bending back, the other muscle is more dominant. But anyway, in a deep squat, if you have knee problems, something that you might want to experiment with is tilting your pelvis forward or back and seeing if you can generate tension between, say from the ASIC, the forward point of the pelvis, to approximately around the greater trochanter, and also from the psoas. And that could be causing the muscles that work on the IT band to activate. It may also be causing glute medius and glute minimus to activate. But at any rate, once you can feel your glute maximus activate, say in this action, you can do this on a chair. Once you can feel glute maximus activate in this action, it can be easier to move that tension around to the side of the hip, so you're feeling the side of the hips activating. But I'd say the most important thing here, so I've covered a wider range of things. Most important thing I'd say, this is sort of like a general perspective on muscle activation, particularly if you have problems, pain, or if you have performance problems where you're not as strong as you think you should be in a particular exercise. If that's the case, look at your body, look at the muscles that work on it in terms of, are you giving that muscle enough room to contract? Are you giving it enough room to effectively contract? So if it's stretched too far, then close it up a bit. If it's too tight, then open it up a bit so that all the muscles of the joint can activate effectively. Anyway, that's it for now. Namaste. Thank you.